So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Arianna Huffington.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you all for being here on a Friday morning before Thanksgiving. That shows real commitment. And thank you to all the organizers, everybody I met, all these great trendsetters. Deborah and I decided brooches are in. I'm not wearing one. She's wearing one. Great. We've also decided that lower heels and flat shoes are in, so check your shoes, ladies. In fact, the Huffington Post style section has introduced flat shoes as a great style statement going back to 3 years now. And we are constantly looking at Carla Bruni in flat shoes, Michelle Obama in flat shoes. So send us your favorite pictures. This is part of the way we're trying to influence the world for the better. It is really great to be here. For those of you who have not heard me before, this accent is Korean. I say that because I joked recently that I was actually born in Fresno, I said, and I had cultivated this accent to give myself an air of being an ethnic minority, which is very popular everywhere these days except in Arizona. And believe it or not, I got 25 letters and emails from people asking me, how exactly did you go about changing your accent? And 2 of them were from Fresno. Which gives you an idea of the gullibility of certain parts of the American electorate that you marketers can certainly take full advantage of. So, let me start by looking at the world we're living in. Having just finished a book tour around the country talking about third world America, I really have the sense that we're living in a split-screen world. Depending on whether you're looking at one part of the screen, you can be incredibly pessimistic and think that we are becoming a third world country. If you look at the other part of the screen, you can become incredibly optimistic because there is an explosion of creativity and compassion and people using social media to connect with each other in unprecedented ways. So it depends on what you're looking at. You know, on one side, especially just before the election, with all this negative advertising and Christine O'Donnell coming out against masturbation, and then she wanted to be in the US Senate, what does she think they're doing there? and then, you know, the amazing demonizing and scapegoating would make you feel very depressed. But then, on the other side, there is this explosion of connectivity. And I don't know how many of you go to Etsy.com, say. I particularly love it because at a time, say, of intense unemployment, when you have 27 million people out of work or underemployed, you find people who are taking their hobbies and their passions and are turning them into a livelihood. And that's something which could not have happened in that accelerated scale were it not for social media. Recently, I was invited to 2 very unlikely places to speak about the power of social media and how to influence each other for good. One is in the Middle East. I went to Abu Dhabi. It was really interesting. Sheikh Abdullah had brought together a conference to see how the Middle East could use social media for good, the way Al-Qaeda and terrorists are using it for bad. Because social media is neutral. You know, it can be used for either. And if we don't learn to use it for good, those who want to destroy the world are going to outwit us and keep using it for bad. So it was really fascinating to be there with Prime Minister Fayyad from Palestine and Abbas and really see how the Arab world is trying to actually use all the new technologies to reach out to the moderates. And that's why I find it particularly sad when you have over 70% of New Yorkers who don't want to build the mosque, as though equating, you know, terrorists and Muslims is a way to try and make us safer. And then last Monday, I was speaking at LACMA, here at the Museum of the Los Angeles County Museum. I don't know if many of you have been to the new space, which is absolutely extraordinary. And they were having a conference of museum directors from around the country about how they should be using social media. And I found it in a way harder to talk to them than to the Middle East people. And the reason for that is because because what the museums offer is something which we all need. And as people who try to constantly influence, we need to recognize that in this time of the split-screen world we're living in, we desperately need to protect what museums at their best give, which is an oasis of peace and tranquility in the middle of a crazy world. So what I was saying to them is, you know, Museum 2.0 will be interesting, but please don't destroy Museum 1.0. Because if you walk into a museum and suddenly you're confronted with people with their cell phones and their iPads and trying to get their app to see what this particular painting refers to and who the painter was and when they painted it and what the era was like, and you think, you know what, I haven't even looked at the painting. So this is a real lesson when it comes to social media generally. It can't become a substitute for the real experience. It can become a way to connect in a deeper way to the real experience, but not a replacement for it. At the same time that the mainstream media are clinging to a kind of fake objectivity, we are seeing those of us in the new media trying to do two things at once. One is establish clear trust. Craig Newman has said, trust is the new black, and there is no question about it. There is nothing more important for us at the Huffington Post and for all of my friends in the media than to earn our readers, our users' trust. When we first launched the Huffington Post in May 2005, my daughters were both teenagers, and whenever they would look at a story in the Huffington Post, they would say to me, I went to check that on CNN to see if it was accurate. So I didn't even have the trust of the Huffington teenage girls. So we have to earn that trust. You know, being able to actually communicate with each other even when we disagree is absolutely critical. In a sense, that was the main point that Jon Stewart was making when he announced the Rally for Sanity. And I happened to be on his show when, in a moment of irrational exuberance, I said, well, you know, if there are people in New York who can't get to Washington, they can come to our office in Soho and we'll provide buses to get them there. I think Andy wasn't happy when he heard that. Well, little did we know that it would end up being 10,000 people that we took to Washington. We had over 200 buses. And we got great sponsors, thanks to Andy. And the great thing was that when I was there at 5 o'clock in the morning at Citi Field in Queens, greeting our sanity riders, as we call them, I was like overwhelmed by what they were looking for. They didn't just want to get to Washington. They had a sense of almost a pilgrimage. They wanted to come together with each other. And they wanted to really reaffirm that we can turn things around in this country without demonizing each other. And there were people who had flown from all around the country, and instead of going straight to Washington, they had come to New York to take the bus to go to Washington. There was one man who said to me, I came from Washington to take the bus to go to Washington. People really want to engage with each other in an authentic way, and as influencers, engaging with each other in an authentic way is a little bit like in any relationship. There is a dark side to intimacy. Like if you're in a relationship and you always want it to be nice, it's not going to be a very deep relationship. You have to be willing to go through the tough times, right? So in that sense, let's say if you have what we are calling sponsor-generated content on the Huffington Post, you may have to be prepared that people may not agree with something you said, or they may have some comments about your brand that are not the kind of comments you would like. But if you're not willing to engage with them, then it's going to be really hard to navigate this new space. You know, like in a relationship, as a brand producer or an advertiser, you don't really ideally just want to be liked, you want to be loved. And if you want to be loved, it means being willing to engage with whatever it is about you that others are finding unlovable. And you see again and again how people are looking to find meaning in their lives. When you talked about the gardening you're going to have and people bringing toys, and this explosion of empathy that we are seeing, even during these very dark times for many people. The reason is that people do want to connect, and they do want their lives to be something more than just our own self-gratification. And in fact, I wrote a book in the 90s, which don't worry, only 30 people read. But it was called The Fourth Instinct, and it was about the fact that this instinct for meaning is real. It exists in all of us. The first three are survival, sex, and power, and you can't really explain human behavior without looking at the fourth instinct. And that's why cause marketing is becoming such a huge part of advertising. And you know, Andy and I and everybody at HuffPost talk a lot about the significance of that space. We have an entire section called Impact. I don't know if you've been on it, but it's a great space at the Huffington Post, an entire section which is all about giving back. It's all about profiling what is working and what people are doing. We also started a new feature that we're calling the greatest person of the day, profiling people who are doing good, because so much of the media is constantly putting the spotlight on what is not working, on what is dysfunctional. So if we can do our part to put the spotlight on what is working, one of my favorite things is our interactive map of the country with stars wherever good things are happening. And I'll give you an example of one good thing, which is there's an unemployed man that I read about on one of those social media sites I frequent, like howigatlayoff.com or recessionwire.com. And on one of these sites, I found out about Seth Reeves, who was an unemployed concierge in Portland, Oregon. He lost his job, and despite filling like 300 job applications, he could not get another job. So he started this social media site that he called we'vegottime2help.org. And he brought together other unemployed and underemployed people, some without any particular skills, like himself, some with skills like lawyers, doctors, and they started helping people of need. And it was really amazing because, as he explained when I first discovered him, he changed the way he saw himself. Instead of seeing himself as a victim, he began to see himself as a contributor. He began to feel empowered. So I wrote about him in my book, and I started talking about him everywhere, on Jon Stewart, on Bill Maher, on any show I would go on. So now he has over 100 cities that want to start We've Got Time to Help, branches of what he's doing. We help him set up as a not-for-profit. So whenever I speak and do things and people give me charitable contributions, I send them to him. Because I feel it's incredibly important, as we're going through these dark times with unemployment, for people not to fall into a deep depression, which is what often happens to people. I'm sure there's nobody in this room who I'm sure doesn't know somebody who's lost a job or a college kid who can't get a job. It's happening all around us. So I really believe in the way that this can actually begin to change the mood in the country. From 27 million depressed people to at least people who, while we're recovering, are doing something that gets them out of that mood. And that's a great, great opportunity for marketing. Because it's about accentuating the positive, it's about spotlighting what's working, and we see the difference that it's doing. And Seth emailed me the other day, he said, I still don't have a job, Arianna, but I've never been busier in my whole life. To wrap all this up, let me just say that another big trend that I feel you would all be incredibly, incredibly well advised to tap into is the trend towards unplugging and recharging. To recognize that we are all hyper-wired and hyper-connected, and the next big trend is going to be disconnecting from all our devices in order to connect with ourselves, which is where we're going to find our greatest source of wisdom. And if the men can stop listening for a minute, we women are leading that trend. Because for men, for some reason, sleep deprivation and being constantly wired has become a symbol of virility. I don't know why, but I was recently having a dinner with a guy, and he bragged that he had only had 4 hours sleep the night before. And I thought to myself, I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, you know what? If you had had 5 hours sleep, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. And in the same way, Brothers and Bear Stearns, for example, and other companies that are no longer around, and you think to yourself, you know what? The people running Lehman Brothers were not stupid. They had very high IQs. The problem was they were not wise. And what is wisdom? Wisdom is seeing the icebergs before they hit the Titanic. That's what leadership is. And if you're sleep deprived, you're not likely to see the red flags. Whether it's in your own relationships or at work. I mean, how many times don't we make our worst mistakes when we are exhausted? Bill Clinton said he made his worst mistakes when he was sleep deprived. He did not specify which worst mistakes he was referring to. So as we're looking at trends, and just to wrap it up before we open it to questions, from brooches, right Deborah, to flat shoes, to empathy, engagement and connection, and sleep. These are the big trends of 2011 and beyond. Thank you.